Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to Amazon Music for partnering with me on this episode of Chasing Creativity, but more on this later. Let's get right into today's episode. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Chasing Creativity. This is Kiran Manral, your host, and today I have with me a very dear friend and a wonderful writer, Singh Choudhary. Welcome to Chasing Creativity, Anu.
What a pleasure to be here, Kiran. Thank you so much.
So we did a bit of Chasing Creativity on the way here. It was a long trek made longer by every single road that was dug up in the city.
Absolutely. We must thank the city and the city gods for making us take all the possible twists and turns, because as we are navigating through the dug up city, we are also creatively thinking about the plots and every other twist and turn that will bring to our story. So, yes, the city adds to our creativity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They say boredom adds to creativity, but I think traffic does not give you boredom, it gives you anxiety. What is your process like? How do you get into creativity?
Such a profound question. So let's begin from how to deal with anxiety. Creativity and anxiety, I think, are best buddies. They're probably bedmates, along with imposter. So the three go hand in hand. So you just have to, at some point, acknowledge that as long as you want to be creative, you will also have to deal with your anxiety. And you'll also have to let the imposter be and probably, deal with her with love and affection. And anxiety it'll be. And now I have started to see anxiety as a good friend, as in if you're a little anxious, then it keeps you on your toes and it keeps you invested in what you're doing. If you're
Okay.
not anxious, then it means that you're indifferent, which is not a very good space to be in for a creative person. So yes, traffic gives us anxiety and also boredom. So but we are creative people, so we'll find ways, and we do find ways of also having some very interesting conversations, also listen to some great podcast, including this one that hopefully you're listening, and hopefully you're not stuck in traffic. But there's so it just, I think it's just letting anxiety trigger your creativity in a way that it's productive,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore then dealing with the imposter so that it does not make you anxious is how one just deals with it.
You've had a very interesting journey, Anu. You've gone from journalism, you were at NDTV, you were at the Gaon Connection, then you went to writing scripts, and you're also an author. You've written a lovely book. How did your journey start into writing, into words? What was little Anu like as a child? Was she a bookworm? Were her parents feeding her with books, or was she going sneaking around finding books? What was that journey like?
It was quite a lonely journey, I have to now admit. I come from a very, very conventional Bihari family, extremely conventional. There was no concept of reading or writing. I was, in fact, the first woman ever to have stepped out of the small city
Okay.
and to have come to a college, Lady Shriram at that, and uh, to have had dreams and ambitions. And therefore, in that sense, I was a little bit of an outlier, not somebody who was fitting, because everybody around me, I mean, I lived in a neighborhood which was, in that sense, a very upper caste, a little bit of a privileged, but yet full of immigrants who had mostly moved from Bihar to Jharkhand. I grew up in which Jharkhand became Jharkhand in
Later.
2001.
Hmm.
Much after I actually grew up, I had my childhood, but there was this clear distinction between where I was growing up, which was in this safe neighborhood, who with people around who spoke the same kind of language. I mean, they spoke the Bihari languages, either Bhojpuri or Magahi or Angeka or Maithili or Hindi. There was very little engagement with English in that sense. Boys were going to English medium schools, girls were not. Girls were mostly going to Sarkari schools or Hindi medium schools. So I was growing up in that kind of a setup. And there was this very close by, there was this basti of Adivasis who also added to a lot to how I was perceiving the world, in the sense that it was also the basti from where our helps were coming,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also the basti which was really, really, in that sense, progressive, because this was free, and they were also, they lived the life that they wanted to, and they were fighting for a separate state in that sense.
Mhm.
So they were fighting for their identity. So all of those experiences sort of informed, um, uh, also the kind of literature that I was picking up, because when I started to read, like I said, I was in a semi-sarkari school, which was a missionary school. It was a convent, but had 50% reservation for the tribal girls, so which meant that there was a lot of engagement with
Mhm.
girls who were coming from various, this was an all girls school. So all kinds of girls from all walks of life, they had, in that sense, some sort of motivation to make it, be independent. So, but also there were girls who wanted to get married and settle
Mhm.
down. So then there was so many kinds of peers that one was growing up with. So I was confused. I was very, very confused with the kind of exposure that I was getting, the kind of upbringing that I had, the kind of world that I was living in, the kind of women that I was engaging with, the kind of role models, especially
Mhm.
women role models that I had. So while Indira Gandhi was a role model somewhere out there in the newspapers that we were reading, at home, I was surrounded by homemakers, my mother, my chachis, who were making at a stretch probably 100 rotis at one given time, because we were living in a joint family. So it was very confusing. So, in order to make sense of the world that I wanted to exist in, I started writing. So it was
Okay.
first mostly like, how we all start, right? Poetry, that's the easiest form. Or so we think when we are
Mm.
writing, even though it's the toughest medium of expression. But that's how it started. And I would write these kacha pakka poems. And then I started to sort of debate, because I was very passionate about some of these
Mm.
things that we were seeing around us. So then I would start to write essays. And then that's how the creative journey really started. And that led me to also, purely out of curiosity, that who were the other people who were writing. So I grew up largely on the very, very staple diet of Hindi literature.
Okay.
And that led me obviously to translations. That was also the time, this was 80s that we're talking about. So also a lot of Russian literature which was being
Huh.
translated into Indian languages. So the libraries had that. So a lot of translations. And then gradually it was only, in fact, I remember I started to actually get exposed to English literature because both my brothers were in a public school. They were in an English medium school, and purely out of curiosity as to what they were reading.
Okay.
So Mill and the Floss is something that I read because it was my brother's textbook. Similarly, I got exposed to Julius Caesar because it was again a part of their textbook. And then slowly, then, one picked up and started to read. So various things, I would say.
So I know this entire journey as a child and about all the influences that happened. That's so interesting to know. And then the decision to go to Delhi. That was a brave decision. So was there any resistance you faced from the family to send the girl out of the city, of the town, of the home to another big bad city? And what were your experiences there?
Where there is a will, there is always resistance on the way. You will not have it smooth. Nobody has ever had it smooth. And especially so for girls who are out there, women who are out there just wanting to just like challenge the status quo more than anything else. If they
Hmm.
want equal opportunities or equal rights in terms of education, or something as simple as, our right to sit on the board,
Hmm.
they have to. We all are facing that. We are that generation which has sort of had the benefits of our earlier generations, but we have intensified it.
Hmm.
So it was tough. Obviously, this is 1996 that I'm talking about, but Delhi was dreamland. It was just so liberating to come to a place where you wouldn't have to look at your watch and look at it, one worry that 5 o'clock I have to be
Be
home,
home.
because बैक इन बिहार देन 5 बजे मतलब सब अंधेरा, यू अंधेरा और आप नहीं जा सकते बाहर, यू आर नॉट सपोज टू बी आउट वंस इट
Hmm.
गेट्स डार्क. और 5 से 5:15 जाता था तो पेरेंट्स वुड स्टार्ट टू वरी, एंड यू वुड ऑलवेज हैव टू मूव आउट विथ, I mean, I've had friends telling me, and friends as in like, boys who would tell me that हम हमारी गाड़ी में बैठ जाओ, you can't like go alone, और हम तुम्हें छोड़ देते हैं, because they also come with that sense of responsibility that girls have to be, छोटा भाई ले जाओ. But so it was very liberating when you take the bus on your own, you go from
Mhm.
one place to the other, and then to be in a college which is very, very, very obviously feminist.
Mm.
So it was an eye-opening experience, and this was also the time when Delhi was sort of like expanding, all the flyovers were coming up, which also was in a way my first introduction to a big city life, where one would get into a traffic jam and it would take like 90 minutes from one point to the other. Having said that, how much of a girl's life changes? Now 5 baje aap nahi aa sakte, but 7:30 is your cutoff,
In
because
Delhi.
7:30 is the time when if you're in the hostel, you're in the hostel, so by 7:30 you would have to come back. 30 से 7:35 भी हो जाता था, तो you would be gated in. So there would be a consequence to that. And again, I'm talking about this very, progressive college. So it didn't change much in that sense. We were still living with, and the more I started to live in Delhi, I started to realize that eve teasing was the same. How you were being looked at in the public transport was the same. How you still had to fight to own the public spaces as a woman was still the same. A lot of those battles had not changed. And unfortunately, 20 years later, when I started to work on a novel, which also became a web series called The Good Girl Show, which was really the first web series that I wrote and directed, which was on the lives of these 4 young girls. This is 20 years later, but we're still fighting the same battles.
Mm.
This is really, we are still fighting for Pinjada Tod, and there's a campaign going on. We are still stepping out from our homes at 8 p.m., wanting to walk towards the metro station for a safe, walk to make the public spaces, including your metro stations, including your parks, your roads safe for women. So things hadn't changed really in that sense. So it's, while Delhi has been very empowering for me as a city, that's where I've grown up. That's where I found my education. That's also where I found my passion. Probably in the sense that the most of my mentors come from there. A lot of my first exposure to public, what shall I say, like, mass media came from Delhi. I worked with NDTV, which was again a very, very strong organization led by very strong women. A lot of these experiences have been very, very positive and have had a very positive impact on my on who I am and how I create and how I perceive the world and how that gets reflected into my stories. But I have to still say that we still have a long way to go.
Heaven knows our daughters' generations, will they see it? What I find very interesting, Anu, is you write in both languages. Do you think in both languages as well? Or do you have to translate in your head?
Now I don't. I mean, it's
Uh,
very seamless now. I don't even think, like, if I have to switch in Hindi, it'll just very, very
okay.
organically happen. In
Happens.
fact, I think in 3 languages. Bhojpuri is my mother tongue.
Okay.
So it's just very organic now. But I think when I started to write in during my early days, Hindi came more naturally to me. It was also the language, just in terms of a lot of expressions that one had to say, like dialogues, for example. I
Mhm.
still think I can write better dialogues in Hindi than in English.
Mhm.
Therefore, I've never attempted like long format in English.
Mhm.
I've very comfortably just stuck to short
Story.
stories or scripts, because screenplays you have to mostly write in English, all your proposals and everything else. But other than that, if there is something that you have to express in terms of emotions, which is representative of what a character is, where she or he comes from, then it very naturally is in Hindi. I mean,
Hindi
I
for you.
very naturally think in Hindi then.
You are a translator as well. You've translated some of our best authors. You're a writer as well. How do you switch between these two hats? How does the writer impact the translator, and how does the translator impact the writer?
That's such a lovely question. Long time ago, when I was still a very novice writer, I mean, I didn't even know if I could. I didn't even know if I could write. A very dear friend of ours, mutual friend, in fact, Natasha Badwar.
Mhm.
She was also my colleague from NDTV. So I told her that, and this was also, I was a young mother, I had quit my job, I was looking for gigs. So writing also actually for me became a source of livelihood.
Okay.
And so did translation eventually, and editing, and some stint that I had at publishing, because this was also a way to sort of keep oneself going and keep the career, if
Hmm.
not career, at least some form of job alive. So when I got my first translation assignment, I came back and told Natasha, and she said that now you're a bona fide, you're going to be like a writer, because the best way to start writing. A few days ago, I was reading Murakami's Novelist as a Vocation, and he extensively talks about how he first was a translator and then he started to write, and he has not, in fact, translated his own works. He's translated
Other writers.
other writers a lot, American authors especially, and that informed his writing, and it really resonated with me, because when you work in two languages while you are getting inspired by, and the duty of, or the responsibility of keeping the essence, the soul of the writer's work alive, is on you, you also have the creative liberty to play with the other language that you're translating into, which means you can transcreate.
Hmm.
So you understand the source language really well, but the translating language empowers you to be creative. And that taught me, you're learning from the masters, because they were such wonderful authors. So you're translating their work. So you're also learning how to use the syntax, how they were using sort of the word play, imagery, everything else that the language does, words do to us. And when I was translating that into Hindi, I was I was becoming rich as a potential Hindi writer. And I have learned a great deal. And I still think, after having worked across so many formats, and I do not get enough time to translate now, I still feel translation's one part of my creative experience that puts me into a state of meditation.
Really?
I have no words to express. I mean, I can't express. It's just inexplicable. But it just is meditative, because you're working with two languages that you're comfortable with, you love, you're, sort of being the bridge. It's such a high.
How wonderful. How wonderful. You have written scripts for some of our most acclaimed shows. You did Arya and you did quite a few others, I think.
Yeah.
Now, for a script writer, it's not just about the creative process, there are so many other factors involved. I know you've spoken about it in another podcast as well, but could you take our listeners through what script writing actually entails?
Script writing, first and foremost, is collaboration. As a screenwriter, whether the story is coming from you or it is coming from somewhere else, which means you're a work for hire writer in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
you're always collaborating, because you're not writing for yourself. Unlike prose writing, unlike
Yes.
other creative mediums, where you first try to entertain yourself. What a joy to be in, right? You're entertaining
Mm.
yourself, and then you're waiting for it to go out in the world to entertain, or sort of connect with other readers. But here you're writing to a vision. And unless you submit yourself fully to that vision and align yourself creatively, probably even ideologically and process wise, it won't work.
Mhm.
So, the one thing that I have learned from script writing, from the process of script writing, is the surrendering of ego. I know I'm sounding a little
Not at all.
dada, but whatever.
It's such
You
an
just,
important thing, Anu. I think a lot of us take too much of ego into our writing, and I'm glad you're
yeah,
talking about it, you know.
which is what we do. I mean, even I do when I'm doing my own stuff, and I know that, oh, I don't care what the publisher thinks, I don't care what the editor thinks, I don't care whether the readers like it or not, because, like I said, it's for myself. And but actually, is it really? We
Hmm.
are expressing not because we want to keep it to ourselves. We are expressing because we want to engage with the outside world. It's just that the audience changes. That understanding came from script writing, and it also requires you to be in constant communication or engagement with other writers who come with different sets of skills, different sensibilities, also sometimes very different ways of working. So it also in a way teaches you to be a part of the team.
Mhm.
And it's quite a learning, because then you are constantly, like, giving and taking, and Initially when I started to write, I realized like, you write, right? You have to acha page khol ke, then unless you write, how do you come up with ideas?
Mhm.
And I would really be in awe of all these senior writers who would keep throwing ideas at you one after the other. Like there would be scene ideas, there'd be character ideas, there would be arc ideas. They would throw ideas and they would like discard it with as much ease. And I used to find it very fascinating. But now, after having done it for a few years, almost 5 years now, I have also realized one more thing: creativity is a muscle memory. As much as you trigger it, you use it, the more you use it, the better it gets, the stronger it gets, and it begins to sort of help you in your journey. You can't sit and wait for Madam Genius to strike or Madam Creativity to, shower her blessings on you. That doesn't happen. And therefore, I'm very grateful for this experience as a scriptwriter, because it has genuinely informed how I also write in other mediums. One basic question which is often asked is it very difficult for a novelist or a short story writer or a writer of prose to turn into a scriptwriter? Absolutely not. One thing that you already have as a writer is, or as a creative person, is that you already, if you have continued to write and if you have sort of submitted yourself to your own process and have in a disciplined manner churned out
Hmm.
stories, you have it in you, you can write, which means you have the diligence and discipline to deliver. However, can every writer become a screenwriter? Not necessarily, because a lot of us do not work or don't want to work as collaborators.
Hmm. Hmm.
We're not comfortable. We want to write in our own isolation, and that's fine. So, if you have that realization that this will require me to put my work out there, where the credits will be shared, where the ideas will be free flowing, where everybody will be contributing, and there'll be constant nitpicking and this process of feedback to which you will have to work, and it's like really work, then a writer, nobody, I don't think some of the finest writers are there for the script writers. And we have a full, like, legacy of that, starting from Ismat Chugtai to Manto
Gulzar
to
Saab.
Gulzar Saab to a lot of the to Kamleshwar, to Rahi Masoom Raza, to even Anand Neelakantan in the near, recent
Times.
times. A lot of writers who, if we were to only look at the legacy, Sharad Joshi, who was a
Yes.
satirist and
Yes.
wrote some of the most wonderful dialogues for a film like Utsav, even. So it has been proven time and again that writers can really become great script writers, but also with the understanding that it's not just for yourself that you're writing with a team, you're writing for the director, you're writing for the producer, you're writing for the actors who will completely own the material that you're creating and will make their own. So you will probably forget Salim Javed wrote that famous line of "मेरे पास मेरा बाप चोर है और मेरे पास माँ है." You will probably remember only Shashi Kapoor and Amitabh Bachchan. So, despite that,
So that's where the ego has to be kept at the side as a writer, and you have to know that what you create is not going to be your own anyway. That's such a lovely thought, and that's such an important thought because we come with so much of baggage of ego as writers, and to surrender that is something most writers would grapple with. Anu, when you're writing a book now, because the process is very different, how internal is writing a book? Because you're writing for yourself now. You're writing, as you said, not necessarily for the readers or the publishers. You're just writing to amuse yourself. So, how different is the process? I know you write short stories. Are you also exploring long form?
yes, I have in fact published a novel. I've
Okay.
just finished another novel.
Okay.
So, but yeah, short story is my favorite medium. So I just completely disconnect myself. Like that writing is, in that sense, far more quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Probably I'm writing only 500, 600,000, 1,500 words at a stretch. But it's completely, it's a very quiet process of
Mhm.
not reading anything, not watching anything, just staying with the story, just playing with the words and playing with the characters, and sort of charting out their journeys, or wanting to first arriving at, wanting to arrive at what I want to say through this story. So theme therefore becomes important, how one wants to say, and in as less words as possible becomes important. There are times when I completely disconnect from my screenwriting job and just do that. It
Okay.
happens rarely, but when it happens, it's very, very, it rejuvenates. It completely, I think, fills my well up. I have no other way to explain this.
Screenwriting, script writing, writing novels, writing plays. What else is
Directing, hopefully, one day,
directing? Hopefully one day.
and producing, definitely.
Lovely. Do you have the script ready? Are you
I'm
working?
working on a script, yes, which is incidentally, I mean, I can't reveal much, but it's also an adaptation of a short story written by a very one of the best authors of our times, and a female author at
Oh,
that, a woman
wonderful.
author. So yeah, it's something that is very, very close to my heart because it's a story of sisterhood and it's a story of two very strong women. So hopefully one day, whether I'll direct or not, I don't know, but I'll definitely produce this because the older I'm getting, the more I'm writing, the more I'm engaging with stories, the more I'm just doing this to just live, breathe, just be. I'm realizing that more and more stories of women have to be told, and this responsibility lies on us.
How wonderful. Thank you so much, Anu, for all these wonderful insights. And I'm looking forward to seeing that movie, and I'm sure you'll direct it.
Thank you so much, Kiran. I hope so too. And it's been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation because sometimes we do need to look at our own creative process as an outsider. I mean, unless you're nudged, you don't think about a lot of things. And when you begin to talk about it, there are so many other realizations that come to us, which actually become critical to our own growth. And therefore, what you're doing is very important. I hope you continue to bring more creative people, sort of decode their process and continue to inspire other people to also live a very creative life.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for that, Anu. And with that, it's a wrap on this episode of Chasing Creativity. This was Kiran Manral. Do listen into us on Amazon Music, on Spotify, on BingePods, wherever you get your audio content. Bye. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Chasing Creativity. I wanted to say thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with me on this episode of this podcast.